Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Tonight, I have something a little more on the serious side. An update I promised to all of you a while back. So, unsettle yourselves for something not only truly terrifying, but for me, a bit close to home. The Memory Man. True Story Update number 2. Violent Disconnection.
Hello once again. I'm sure you know already, but my name is Sabian Lockhart. I sit here again, writing this to all of you, not because I want to, but because I said I would. Before I move forward, let me explain. A large part of me wishes that there was no new information to give, typically prompted by unforeseen circumstances. However, my last update ended with the intention to follow up my discussion with Pennsylvania law enforcement. So, what is to follow is what I have promised. But I truly wish that there was nothing to tell, that none of this ever happened. But it did. Last month, during October, I met with the intended law official, whose exact position, name, and other detailed information I have been asked to keep anonymous. So, I'll be referring to this person as Detective Howards. Please keep in mind, though, that this person is not a detective, nor is that his real name. When I met with Detective Howards, it was over a face call, as the multiple-hour drive has been made redundant with technological advancements. Mostly, he took down my information, asking me to give him a detailed description of my story, the color of the car, what the man looked like, etc. I told him my friend's story as well, to which I had to describe in the best detail that I could with the information that my friend provided to me. At the end, I was allowed to ask a few questions of my own, but mostly he told me that he couldn't tell me anything about ongoing cases. The only thing he did tell me is the specific precincts that were handling some possibly relevant ongoing cases, and one of those which could be linked to the information that I had provided. Of course, as soon as he told me that, I desperately wanted to know more, but he would not tell me. When the call ended, all I had was a list of 3 Pennsylvania precincts that were possibly investigating relevant cases. This left me with only one option. October is a busy month for me, and honestly, I'm not dying to find out more into what could have been a grisly ending to my own existence when I was 7. But of course, intrigue always gets the better of me. And as I began wrapping up all the festive projects that I'd been working on throughout the month, I found myself with more and more free time. Eventually, I reached out to a friend that I hadn't talked to in years. Again, even though he didn't specifically say it, I will keep my friend's name anonymous as well, as I know he would appreciate it moving forward. And I'll call him James. James Roberts. Over the course of the years that we had grown apart, not having talked in a long time, James Roberts had become Officer Roberts. James had gone to the police academy, and while he began his career in law enforcement, I was busy partying my 20s away. Suffice it to say, we didn't speak much. Still, when I reached out to him, things couldn't have gone more smoothly. A Facebook message turned into a phone call, which turned into an offer of drinks the next time I was in town. James had opened up to me like we'd never spent a day apart. I wasn't trying to exploit him, but there's no doubt that I did. Before the month was over, I would take that 3-hour trip to Pennsylvania, the rolling mountain ranges and tree-covered hillsides offering up a plethora of memories, most of them good to be honest. Still, I knew why I was truly there, even if my wife and child didn't, and before we made it to my parents' house to settle in for a short visit, I decided we would take a side trip to go see an old friend of mine. James has a really nice house and a great family. They really couldn't have been more hospitable. His wife and mine talked for hours like old friends, and my daughter, well, she stayed on her Switch all night. James and I got caught up in his garage, sipping whiskey that he had grabbed from a nearby shelf. I didn't explain everything at first. I kept things in the same vein of simply telling him all that had happened in my life since we had last talked. But as the whiskey started to do its thing, I began to tell him about all of this that I've already explained to you. My childhood experience of almost being kidnapped, my friend's very similar experience a short time after, and every detail that I had delivered to Detective Howard's. I didn't even have to ask. He began by telling me that he shouldn't be telling me this, and started delivering everything I both hoped I'd find and wished I wouldn't. James worked for one of the 3 precincts that Detective Howard's had given to me, and I'm pretty sure it was this case that he was referring to that was possibly and relevantly related. One of the cases his precinct had been working for years had gone cold with no new leads for a while. The kidnappings and occasional lost child details were provided to news outlets, but anything insinuating that the crimes were related were hidden from public view. Most of these instances I have heard of in my own research. In 1987, there was a child found dead in Montrose Lake. The report said that the boy inexplicably drowned, and from the coroner's report, it said that's how he died. What was excluded from the papers, but not from the official police reports themselves, were the traumatic injuries suffered by the boy, including missing skin, fingernails, eyes, and teeth. However, the eyes weren't technically missing. They'd been burned out. Nevertheless, despite all this, the boy died by drowning. Then, in 1992, 3 more children went missing. One was found in a ditch on Snake Creek Road with a skull fracture, broken legs, missing both a few teeth and both eyes. The other 2 children still haven't been found. Worst of all, though, the reason he was telling me these things in the first place, and likely the incident that Detective Howard's had referred to, was the discovery in 1997. On an isolated back road, out near Brackney, Pennsylvania, an old house, small, mostly run down and unassuming, sat at the end of a long dirt road, not too dissimilar than the one I grew up on, albeit without mine's signature steep incline. There were 2 houses at the road's mouth where it intersected with another, but a little less than half a mile resided between them and the 1-story farmhouse that sat at the end. That year, 1997, a little girl had gone missing, from a township called Heart Lake. I was still living in the area and going to high school when this happened, and I remember hearing about this. I knew that she was found, but I didn't know the details. I still wish I didn't. One of the elderly people living in one of those two houses happened to see that missing girl in the back of an old vehicle she could not give a description of. The girl looked distressed and scared, and if that old woman hadn't been letting her dog out that night, at that exact time, she wouldn't have seen her at all. Having recognized the girl from the news, the woman called the authorities. By the time the police had arrived, they had no idea if they were too late or not. The closest law enforcement was still a little under 45 minutes away, and by the time they had assembled the force necessary, it was over an hour before they had arrived. That's what the official report says. James let me in on a little precinct secret. Foolishly, and being the backwoods cops they were, they actually didn't show up until the following morning. I can't speak in words how negligent this is. If they had followed up immediately, that girl would likely still be alive, and so would countless others, as whoever is responsible for all this likely would have been caught. When they did arrive, the house was silent, windows dark, and only a single vehicle sat in the driveway. There were 4 police cars in total, but only the 2 officers from the first car to arrive went up to the house and knocked on the door. After getting no response, they knocked again, and again, but still got no reply, not even a stirring from within. There didn't seem to be anyone home, and if there was, they weren't coming to the door. Again, the report says a warrant was issued that following morning, but this is backwoods Pennsylvania we're talking about, and the officers waited for no such thing. The rest of the police force met them at the door, and using a battering ram, they proceeded to break it open. Inside, what they found was nothing short of absolutely horrifying. The place was a mess, consumed by debris, animal feces, and mold. The living room was a collection of wood pallets for benches to sit on, covered in musty and grimy-feeling blankets, ripped and stained. A tube television sat on the floor in an opposite corner. The bedroom down the hall connected to the only bathroom in the house. Police passed by that bathroom on their way to the one and only bedroom in the house to discover it was also nearly covered in black mold. The tub and shower nearby were the same, no shower curtain to obstruct their vision. What was once entirely likely a white bathroom was now a mix of browns, grays, and fuzzy black growth. The bedroom, it was stated by those on scene, smelled of rancid old sweat and urine, so strong it could be smelled strongly before even entering the room. The bed only had a single old and dirty blanket draped across the brown and red-stained mattress beneath. The floor was covered in refuse, and pornographic posters of both men and women were hung haphazardly about the walls like wallpaper. The kitchen, I was told, was the worst. The cupboards and cabinets were mostly bare, aside from a few packages of mac and cheese and jars of peanut butter. Despite this, what seemed like a mountain of old plates and pans filled both basin sinks, and the refrigerator boasted no edible food at all. Instead, they found jars of what was obviously inedible contents. From a glance, the police couldn't initially tell what it was, only that each could be a mixture of old, moldy meat and possibly bone. These were later identified as human remains, and from the samples taken of the flesh and teeth found within, of several different people, none of which could be properly identified. At this point, I gasped at James's story, and I poured myself another glass of whiskey. Not wanting to hear more, but knowing that he had more to say, I found myself speechless. He seemed hesitant, and I don't know if it was the whiskey or not, but I think he was intent on finishing the story anyway. I didn't see how it could get worse, or how this all connected to me, but I would soon find out. Later that day, that old house was swarmed with more police, detectives, coroners, and every other type of unit. Using dogs, the canine units searched the grounds and nearby forests. What they found shocked one of them into quitting their job entirely. They had found the girl from Heart Lake. She was tied to a tree in a dense part of the forest, about 300 feet from the house. The girl was clearly dead. She'd been partially skinned, her eyes had been burned out, and she was missing a few teeth. She'd apparently been stabbed through the chest, but the weapon that was used was unclear and nowhere to be found. Next to her, on both sides, stretching out to include 6 of them arranged in a circle, all facing the center, were the remains of 5 other small bodies. The ages were determined to be between the oldest at 16 years and the youngest at 8. Their bodies were in varying stages of decomposition. Some were partially skeletalized, and some fresher, but burned beyond recognition. These poor kids were forced to look into their own fates, seeing what happened to the others that had come before them, and therefore know in an instant all they would be forced to endure. A fate I can't bear to imagine. Prints were taken at that house and the rest of the scene, but none have ever matched anything in police databases. The other children were so badly decomposed, their identities were never determined, and therefore were left out of public record. The house belonged to an old woman who apparently died years prior, who had no surviving family. The vehicle in the driveway had been stolen out of state years beforehand as well, with no usable leads found within. The engine had also died, and the old white utility van was undrivable, and could not have been the vehicle the elderly woman had seen the night before. And that was it. A white utility van. That was how Howard's seemed to connect my story to this one. At least, that's what I've surmised. I finished my conversation with James about this story, making sure that he had no other information to tell. The only thing I found out is that these were not the only children found in the area under these circumstances. He told me of at least another 5, all found within a few hours away or less, having been through similar events, all missing eyes and teeth. I shouldn't have been driving home, especially since we nearly killed that entire bottle of whiskey, but I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to clear my head of all of this, lest I risk never being able to sleep again. He did manage to tell me one last thing, something that turned my blood cold, but I tried not to let on how disturbed I was. Within an hour, we bid him and his wife goodbye, while I made a very cautious and slow drive down the road. I pulled over to talk to my wife and waited to sober up a little. I would have let her drive, but, well, she doesn't drive, so with my daughter having her headphones in and not hearing any of the questions we asked her, I began divulging everything to my wife that I'd been told. By the time I was done with all I had to say, I felt competent enough to start driving the back roads slowly towards my parents' house. But I couldn't get that story out of my head, and my wife agreed with me that was likely the fate that I had avoided when I was 7, when that man had driven off. That was the suffering and the end of my existence that I narrowly avoided by chance. That's the part she agrees with me on. The thing she doesn't is my feeling of responsibility. That if I had told someone sooner, maybe some of these other young souls could have been spared. It's a guilt I think I'll live with forever. But all this still leaves me with more questions, such as, what vehicle did that woman see? And why was this person doing all this? And the thing I know for sure is that whoever had done this was still out there. That's what James had told me. The last story he delivered. The 9-year-old boy that they found only last year, with his eyes burned out and teeth removed. This monster is still out there, and he hadn't stopped. I'm going to keep my ears and eyes open and see if I can find out more. If I do, I'll post another update. Sabian, out.
Well, as much as I say I don't want to, I'm sure curiosity may push me to go a little further. To what end? I don't know, but I expect nothing good. But if you need something a little more fictionally terrifying, stop by again next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.